Thanks, Viola, and good evening to everybody. Good evening to folks calling in for all across the country. I'm WFP National Director Maurice Mitchell, and I want to thank you all for joining us. So today, I want to talk about a subject often ignored in political spaces. I want to talk about trauma and about how we respond to that trauma. Here at the Working Families Party, we're building something different. It's not just about our platform or about our strategy or even about our candidates. We're building something that is fundamentally a different kind of political party. Now, the Democratic National Committee and the DCCC and all the various other committees of the Democratic Party, those committees are in existence to raise and spend money in order to elect Democrats, full stop. What we're building is connection and belonging around our shared values and interest. We're building a political community. Now, community means having people with you, someone to celebrate your wins, and also people who sit with you through pain and grief. When communities are hurt, when communities experience trauma, communities come together, not simply to do business, but to mourn, to process, and to heal. Not simply to raise money, expend money to elect people, but to do all the various things that communities do. In Dayton, Ohio, we saw once again the senseless deaths that result from the cynical interests whose main daily concern is to ensure that people can buy military-style weapons. And there have been more than 200 mass shootings just in this 1 year. But I want to talk a bit more about one mass shooting in particular. What we saw in El Paso earlier this month wasn't just a shooting. It was a deadly rampage planned and perpetrated by a white nationalist, motivated by a desire to, quote, stop the Hispanic invasion. Now, many of us were deeply, deeply shaken by those aberrant acts, especially our Latinx family and all immigrants. For folks whose sense of security has already been threatened, this violence is a nightmare come true. This shooting wasn't just senseless violence, it was an act of political violence, or to put it plainly, terrorism. When the official policy of our government is family separations and raids, like the one that arrested more than 600 workers in Mississippi, for example, it isn't hard to see how this doesn't feel random, but rather just a few more steps down a logical progression of dehumanization. One of the missions of the Working Families Party is to not let such cruelty stand through the way that we engage in our politics, to change the world that produces that cruelty. But another, because we are a community, is to heal together. So we felt it was important to create space for all of us to process what happened collectively. In our small group discussions today, we invite you all to share your reactions and to find strength in our collective determination to build a better world. After a tragedy, there is a familiar refrain that we often hear from politicians, especially right-wing politicians and Republicans. Some of them will offer, quote, hopes and prayers, but say it's, quote, too soon to talk politics. This is as familiar as it is useless, this refrain of it's too soon to talk politics. It's the refrain of people who want to avoid serious substantive discussion of the necessary changes that have made themselves so abundantly clear. So I want to be clear from the standpoint of the Working Families Party and this community. This is absolutely the time to talk politics, because politics is, after all, one way we make collective change. It's always been one avenue that we as communities come together in order to change the problems that we face as communities. Now, white supremacy and the white Christian identity movement that is championing it is an existential threat, not just to many of us individually, but in fact to humanity and all human life on this planet, regardless of your race. That white supremacist movement has found a home in the Republican Party, and to a real extent has captured the Republican Party. It's an alliance with the fossil fuel industry and other opponents of action to hold back climate change. The continuation of Republican rule means extinction. And if those two issues seem disconnected, climate change and white supremacy, think about how climate change will worsen the global migration crisis, which will further fuel white supremacists as they use global migration as an easy way to find relevance in their talking points and their politics, and bringing more and more working class people into their movements. If you're having trouble imagining the nexus of white nationalists and climate change, think about Brazil, for example, where nationalist, racist President Bolsonaro is allowing the Amazon to burn to benefit ranchers and loggers at the expense of the planet and indigenous peoples. I believe the modern Republican Party is a force for evil in this nation and the world. That's not a partisan statement, it's a factual one, grounded in our history. It is our duty to defeat the white Christian identity movement, both politically and culturally, if we're going to marshal the extraordinary wealth, power, and human creativity we have in this country for moral ends. We need people to link their fates across race. Now, we can't do that so long as the appeal of white supremacy and the structures that it support remain in place. If we take a step back, all of our work, door knocking, texting, running for office, all of our work is about building a multiracial movement of working people to defeat the white nationalists and their billionaire allies and put power in the hands of the people who will use it for good. We believe in the possibility of victory in that struggle, was strengthened by events that shaped me profoundly 5 years ago, just this month. 5 years ago, people in Ferguson, Missouri, contributed to that struggle in transformative ways. A week after Michael Brown was murdered, I witnessed what it looks like when a community responds to trauma by doing what seemed impossible, coming together and resisting. Resisting the notion that in the face of that trauma, the best way to honor the dead is to remain calm, to remain safe, to stay at home. It's to light candles around a vigil and bow your head in prayer. The people in Ferguson responded to the trauma of a death by state violence in their community and showed it was possible to transform that pain into a freedom struggle. They mourned, but their response was also political. The fact that the district attorney in St. Louis County today is Wesley Bell and not Bob McCullough is because the people of Ferguson translated their protest into politics, as well as many, many activities to this day. That is the lesson I learned, and I continue to learn from the people of Ferguson and the people in St. Louis. The cameras left a long time ago, but they are still fighting to this day. At times when we experience losses, we often hear the word of labor activist Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize. It might be the opposite of quote unquote hopes and prayers, right? The idea of don't mourn, organize. But I think there's something incomplete about that idea, don't mourn, organize. It's true that if we stop our work to mourn our losses, then the forces who cause the suffering can gain even more ground. But we should never be so disconnected from our humanity that we don't mourn in the face of suffering. Our mourning means that our humanity is still intact. The organizing we do should be fueled by that. In moments such as these, and in times such as these, we must do both. We mourn and we organize.